In this video we'll be looking at the AQA GCSE Computer Science Component 1 practical programming, and specifically looking at this idea of writing to a CSV file in Python. And this should help you cover requirements in the controlled assessments that relate to things like exporting data to a spreadsheet. So if we look in the specification, your learning outcomes, the students should know how to use an external text file to read and write data in a way that is appropriate for the programming languages used and the problem being solved. So whereas you might think simply writing to a TXT file covers this requirement, when we think about what a CSV file actually is, so although we commonly look at it with a spreadsheet application, CSV just stands for comma separated values, and if I look at that in Notepad, I can view it as a text document, and it's just basically a text file with one additional feature of being able to distinguish items of data separated by commas, as in comma separated values. So I look at the same thing now in Excel. We can see when Excel reads this, it's able to separate it into a series of columns and rows. So we're going to be having a look at some Python code that can create one of these files from your program. So to start off with this, it needs an external library, and we're going to start by importing the CSV library. And this next bit requires what's called some boilerplate. So I'm simply going to look at the Python documentation, and I'm going to copy what's on there to start us off. Okay, so I'm just going to have a look for an example of writing using the csv.writer class. I'm just going to copy the code we've got, and let's have a look at this so far. So if I were to run this code, we'll leave this top one. All it does is first of all open a file. So in the working directory of my program, it's going to create a CSV file called eggs.csv. And the way it works is, first of all, initializes this writer object. You don't really have to worry about the details of that. All we need to make sure is that it's actually using commas properly. So the one thing I'm going to change is that the delimiter needs to become a comma. And then writerow, you can think of it working exactly the same as print. It's just a function that provides output, but rather than print, which displays the output in the shell, writerow transfers the output to the file. Okay, and the argument is always going to be a list. So you can see what this one will do. It will replicate the list with spam in it 5 times, and then concatenate this to baked beans. So you'll end up with a spreadsheet with spam, 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 and baked beans. So quite an obtuse example. So let's have a look at something a little bit more worthwhile. So I'm just going to call this example 2. I'm just going to call this write. I'm going to leave that as CSV file. So this with keyword, so you might have before done something like file equals open, file name, read, etc. But then that requires you to also use the close method. So what this with structure does is, as soon as you kind of dedent from the structure, it will automatically close the file for you. Obviously, leaving files open, this is something that can cause undesirable effects, and it doesn't make a program kind of error-free if you fail to do this. So this helps you to remember to close the file, because it does it for you. Okay, so instead of just writing some rubbish, I'm going to just start by adding some names. So let's have a look. Well, user 1, user 2, user 3. Okay, so I'm just adding a list of 3 strings, and what I should see now is that when I run my program, first of all, I'm going to save it to this, writing to CSV example. Okay, so as soon as I run my program, I'm going to see this appear on the shell. So like I said, now instead of using print, we're going to just use write.writerow, and we're going to give it the same list, and we should see now when I run the program a second time, as well as the data coming up on screen, this line of code is going to make it output to the file. Okay, so now I'm going to check in the working directory, and I should see, just as we instructed the program to do, it's made a file called example2. I'm going to click to open it in Excel, and we can now see the data in the spreadsheet. Okay, so obviously this is helpful, but the idea is that you're going to need to get a program to process some data and write it to a spreadsheet using kind of extra logic, maybe a loop. So now we're going to have a look at this example program, and I'm just going to save it to the same working directory as I was in before. Here. And let's talk through, well, first of all, let's have a look at what this does. Okay, so I'm going to run the code, and this time it's a variable, so rather than it always writing to example.csv, I've first of all got a little bit of logic that will allow me to input the name of the file, and then this bit, an extra bit of robustness here, and this is just if the user forgets to add the file extension, the program will add it for you. Okay, so I'll show you an example of that, and I'm going to say users. Okay, so this is an kind of a log in the shell of what's happened. So the idea is that this program creates a list of users and passwords, and now we're going to have a look at the file that's been created. Okay, just like I specified, it's called users.csv, and when I look at it, it's now a spreadsheet, so I've created some new user accounts with some usernames and some passwords. So now let's step through this code and have a look at how it's doing this. So at the start, I'm just starting with a list of usernames with just some strings in. I'm asking the user to enter the name of the file and storing it in a variable. And the way this little bit of code works, I mean, you can check one of my other videos on this, but it's simply checking the last 3 characters of what the user enters, sorry, last 4 characters, and we're checking if it's not equal to .csv, that means they haven't added the file extension, so therefore we need to add it for them. Okay, so moving on to this next bit, exactly like the last example, I'm opening the file, and then first of all I'm writing the column heading. So I'm using the writerow method once with just a username and password, and this is what adds the headings at the top of the spreadsheet here. This next bit is the bit that's using a loop. Okay, so I'm using a loop to loop over each username, and just like I can use a loop to print a series of values, instead of just doing that each time, I'm going to write each username to the spreadsheet, and I'm also using this, don't worry too much about this, but I'm generating a random password using something called a list comprehension. We're not going to worry too much about that code, but simply it generates the random password and then writes the name and the random password to the spreadsheet. So because this is in a loop and there's 5 usernames, it will do this for each username each time, iterating through the list. So the first time it does it with Bob123, makes him a random password, and then writes Bob123 and his random password to the spreadsheet, loops back round to the top, and the iterator has now changed, so name has now become Simon64. Simon64 gets another random password, we write Simon64 and his random password to the file, and so on and so forth. Okay, so hopefully this video has helped you to understand how you can use a CSV file, the CSV Python library to write to an external CSV file.